This is the 6th talk of the April 89 7-day retreat. In picking one question over another, there may be the risk that the particular question being discussed is not, at this moment at least, everyone else's question. How does the mind respond to that? Yesterday we were talking, I think the first question that was brought up was that of boredom. Somebody having mentioned that, being bored. And the response of a few people later in meetings was, I was amazed to hear someone being bored. I'm not bored at all. And other feelings and reactions may come with this. For one thing, the brain may generalize, people are bored, as though a question that is brought up is sort of given to present a profile of what is happening in the retreat, which it's not. We're just looking into a problem in a fresh way. So please not to generalize from something that is brought up that this is how everybody feels, and rather to become aware of that as what the mind is used to do, to generalize, to make things into a formula so one feels familiar with what is happening. And that's very dangerous because one may be wrong. It may not be so. The assumptions may be false. The other thing is it possible to enter into something, even though for the time being it isn't one's problem? This is the art of working together, being together. To enter into each other's problems in a new way, freshly, trying to find out what is going on in the mind, which is not my mind or your mind, but this human mind. It's a common mind with some particular characteristics in each one of us. But its general functioning is universal. Functioning in thought, emotion, fear, wanting, and so forth. Guilt, retaliation, and wanting to be loved, wanting to love, all of that is very universal among all of us. And the thinking that my mind is different or my problems are different is the very isolation from each other. The very wall that we erect, or thought erects, between you and me. Two questions. We'll start out with two questions or things. One person saying, again, I don't remember verbatim, I really object to hearing you say that we want to be something all the time, or want to become something all the time. And I also feel that in saying this with the kind of emphasis that you give to what you say, you're influencing people to think in those terms. And of course, as one begins to think in those terms, one will be affected by the thoughts. We may want something entirely different. Why should we want something that is painful? And why talk that we want that, or that we cling to that, which you also do. You emphasize our clinging to our self-image or identity. And another conversation or dialogue was, don't you think that identity is necessary in life? Isn't it a necessary ingredient of being in society, living as a professional, communicating with each other? And where does right action come from? Doesn't that have to do with right self-image? Remember one retreat which was attended by a couple professional psychotherapists who were about, after the retreat, to go to a conference. And they said, this is what the whole thing is about, to project an image and to accept that, to work on it. Going back to the objection to saying things, every time something is said in a talk, it is possible to misunderstand it, to misconstrue it, to take it as a doctrine to be believed in, to be influenced by it. That's the danger, that's a tremendous risk of speaking, of talking. And no matter how passionately one stresses that what is said is not said to be believed in, accepted as a word of authority, but to be tested and looked at, this process goes on when there is not awareness of the processes of the mind, of the wanting to believe, wanting to accept, wanting to be influenced, in order not to have to think and look for oneself. And no one can make anybody think and look for themselves. I think it's outside of the reach of any one of us. The more one tries to do that, we've been trained that way. Listen, think clearly. And all of these commands that were given to us at one time or another are now internalized. We give them to ourselves. They appear on this internal screen, and there's action and influence coming from it, and reaction. So, when something like this is said, that we want to be something, almost with anything we do, or become something in anything we do or say, this is not said out of the clear blue sky. It comes out of observation in oneself and sharing it with many people who are also observing very seriously within themselves and sharing and dialoguing and looking and going into these things together. Not in a manner of influencing each other in our thoughts, but bearing them, opening them up to inspection. The emphasis or passion with which words come out may sound like the desire to influence and control or have power over people. I can say there's none of that. But am I correct? Can you tell whether this is so? Or are we at any point of our life at a point where we need to look for ourselves? And the amazing thing, the utterly amazing, miraculous thing is that it is possible for a human being to see directly, uninfluenced by all the past conditioning, all the past thought patterns that have been so heavily imprinted upon this human mind through thousands and thousands of years of education, tradition, religion, philosophy, and so forth. It is possible for a different mode of looking and seeing and perceiving to come into being, which we call awareness or attention or seeing, or an openness of perception, a wholeness of perception, which has no training method to it. It is not something one can train oneself in, because that's thought and habit and the same old thing of influence and distortion of perception. How it comes into being, why it comes into being, I can't tell. But it has something to do with being concerned, deeply concerned about how we live in so much agony and so much difficulty, alone and with each other, on a small scale and on the global scale. So alienated from each other so much of the time, in spite of all of our talk of love, loving each other, loving our neighbor. All the ideals of the centuries have not brought about this love for each other. Not love which is a bargaining. I love you, but I expect you to love me back in this and this and this way, in the same way I love you. Or else there's going to be anger or irritation, frustration or hatred, jealousy. That's not the love we talk about. So, without knowing any cause for this awareness to come into being, it does come into being. It can operate. And often in most unexpected, at most unexpected time, maybe. my limited knowledge, it always has to do with this concern and giving time and energy to face what concerns one, what bothers one, what pains and nags and agonizes one, alone and in relationship, to face that, to grapple with it, alone and together, in quietness, not just in endless discussion. There seems to be a need for quietness, for facing things quietly and alone. Without getting encouragement or reward for it or support for it. Because you could say doing this together is its own support, and we will talk about this later. And yet, very often, in first coming to a retreat, one does not feel supported at all. On the contrary, one feels everybody's off on their own thing, looking depressed or like zombies. So often in the middle of a retreat or toward the end, somebody who's felt this way says, something happened. And all of a sudden, I feel very close to all these people and I don't know one of them. The question of whether we don't need an identity in our daily life, negotiating with each other, living with each other, as a professional, for instance. One person asked, don't you have an identity too here, working in Springwater? We do have a brochure which describes what we're doing. It took us at least 2 years to bring it out, maybe longer. And once it's out, it's already not quite correct anymore. But it's too much and too expensive to make another one right away. So there is this brochure with pictures and descriptions. We really worked hard on this to just have it not so, I don't want to remember it all. But why does one have to identify with this thing? There's the place. When one does this work, one works on staff, or one gives talks, meets with people. And it surprises one when somebody says, I've heard about you. One doesn't think in those terms. Most of the time, maybe sometimes. But it is not something to cling to, meaning to think about it all the time and get positive feedback or good feelings or energy boosts from it, which is what we mean by clinging to an identity. Needing to think about what one is or has or does in order to feel augmented or aggrandized or energized, feeling important. These are the words, but there are physiological processes that accompany these thoughts and words, and to those we're addicted if we cling to an identity of being the president of something, or being a famous artist or a well-known physician. The question is, why can't one work medically with people, paint pictures, write music, without being a musician or a painter or a doctor? Let people call one that if they wish to. A few doctors who don't mind being called by their first names, maybe they like it even, to get off of the throne of doctor, but the patient is called by her first name. That used to annoy me. Much nicer to call the doctor by the first name too, and for oneself also, and for the doctor. And then you become two human beings in that office. And he may show you a picture of his children or the house he built. So one has to question that. Do we need an identity? What do we need it for? To put into a telephone book that one is a psychotherapist? That's for people to find one if they are looking for one. But then, in meeting with a person, is one the therapist who knows a little bit something and the patient doesn't? And then there's this ominous relationship. Does one have to think about oneself as being somebody and derive pleasure from those thoughts? Pleasure, power, energy. We're questioning, and each one can question that for herself or himself. Whether it is possible in this society which is so much into being somebody and climbing the ladder, becoming somebody more powerful, more rich, more important. Whether in this society it is possible to do the job and do it well, particularly if one likes what one is doing, without becoming somebody in the process. And therefore not losing touch with the people one works with. Usually it's put, I have 30 people working for me. People say that. And I sort of cringe when somebody says that. Or sometimes mentioned when the dentist, who's a good friend, says to me, open your mouth for me. Open your mouth is enough. And if one becomes observant of these little things, they do a little something for one. Because here I am and you do this for me. It may be a sheer habit, but it may not be. That's why we can question everything. That's the beauty of it. And discover little niches in which energy gets locked up. Locked up meaning serving to please oneself and therefore not available to being at one with everything, being in tune, in touch with the whole world, the whole universe. We need to question everything because our thoughts and habits run so smoothly most of the time and so unconsciously. One may not think that one is making anything out of oneself, and yet when the acknowledgement or the praise is absent, then one begins to smart or feel uncomfortable or irritated, or depressed, or down on oneself, or down on others. There was something else I meant to say, but it just doesn't come right now. About this identity. Don't we need an identity? Maybe it'll come later. The other part of that question was, where will right action come from? If not from some kind of an image about ethical behavior, moral, ethical behavior, which we try to teach our children, at least we think. See, what we think we're teaching our children is not what they're learning. Because the way in which we teach may be what is picked up, the threateningness of it, or the harshness, or that something is said by an adult but not done. Saying one thing, doing another. But, see, we could go into all the branches of this whole tree of self-identity. But let's stick with, where does right action come from, if not from some ethical thought, image? That needs questioning, doesn't it? Right action coming from the morals that we have learned. Where do we learn them? From whom? In what context? There was a review of a book, I just found it recently. 19 years ago this book was reviewed. It was a book by Hannah Arendt, reviewed by Bruno Bettelheim, and it was called The Banality of Evil, Eichmann in Jerusalem. Just reread it recently. And here was a man, no matter what people were trying to make out of him in the country where he was being judged, he was a man who by all standards was normal. There was nothing psychiatrically wrong with him. Had a normal family life, was a good father. We don't know, but we weren't in the house. But by all accounts, conscientious worker, loyal unto I don't know what, to do what his superior told him to do. The one time that he did go to a concentration camp, he was revolted, and he never went there again. Couldn't see it. Couldn't stand the sight of what he saw. One realizes over and over again the tremendous power of thought to make a human being do almost anything in the name of my country, my leader, my king, my president, my ideology. And the power of indoctrination by picture and image. We saw it recently on TV in this movie, The Face of the Enemy, in which the man who did this show had collected a huge amount of cartoons showing how the enemy is depicted all over the world, not just in Germany, as vermin, as monster, unhuman, subhuman, evil, bloodthirsty, frightening, to be done away with, to be cleansed off of the surface of the earth, purged. There's thought operating, image operating. A child who doesn't have an image of another child yet may get into some kind of a fight, but then they make up. It doesn't have an image yet. He's this or that. That comes through listening to the adults and through looking at cartoons. Cartoons in which sometimes the characters have this quaint accent, that the evil ones don't speak English like the good ones do. They have an accent, a rolling R or something. It's amazing when one watches cartoons, what is put into the mind of the kids apart from the action, just alone, the symbols that I use. How patriotism and who the enemy is are instilled through the cartoons on Saturday morning. So what moral or ethical right action can come out of any image or idea of what is right? Because what is right, the idea of what is right and ethical, varies from one country to another, one social class to another, one epoch to another. A religion that proclaims to be a religion of love, a loving God, a loving Son. Just read recently that more people have been killed in the name of that religion than in the name of any other ideal or thought or God. So what trust can we put into the morals or ethics that we have grown up with, or the religious precepts of? Don't kill, but there are justified wars. Justifiable wars. So where does right action, is there such a thing as right action at all? One can become very cynical or relativistic, nihilistic. It's all relative. There is no right, there is no wrong, there is no truth. It's all relative and absurd. But that's also thought, that's also idea. And also one can have an identity in this kind of philosophical strain. Be a nihilist or whatever, existentialist, whatever one likes to call oneself, just to be something. Some shelter for this sense of I am. I am with others who are like-minded. A great need for like-mindedness. Because we are connected with each other. But the way we do connect with each other, most of the time is through something else. Through an idea, a movement, some participation in something that one can identify with. Ceremonials and so forth. And you could say, well, what about here? Isn't that the same thing? We're questioning it. We're looking at it. Does one come here to work alone and together, or does there also emerge an identity? And can that be seen? And can one work without that? Not milking the energy that comes from a shared identity, which immediately puts one apart from others who don't belong to this. No matter how peaceful one may feel with assuming an identity, one separates oneself from the rest of the world. It's inevitable. The thought which is used for identity operates that way, in opposites. Us and them. So that's why we need to question, bring it up, discuss it, look at it freshly, not assume because yesterday I felt no identity, therefore this is settled for the rest of my life. Or like one person said, are you maybe a little bit attached to being non-attached? One can flaunt that and not be aware of it. So let's call our attention to it, if we do. And be done with it instantly. It doesn't take any time. One doesn't have to work on that. One sees it and is done with it. But the question still lingers, is there right action? Which does not come out of thought or image or a system of morals, ethics, precepts. This question is asked very often. People will say, I don't trust a place where there are no precepts kept. But what about places where precepts are taken? Are they kept? How does one keep a precept? If one just follows the word, one can end up like Eichmann in Jerusalem, loyal to the precept, unto death or unto horror. One needs to see, there needs to be seeing, there needs to be freedom from all the imagery and symbolism and tradition of the past, to see clearly this instant, to see myself and you clearly, not as an image, not as somebody. Does that make sense? Does it make sense to say that the clarity of seeing is the right action? Clarity of seeing is intelligence operating, not according to learned precepts or morals or ethics, but according to what is. The whole of life, not my life or the life of my group, but all of life. All human beings. And then when the question comes up, how do I get this right insight, this direct clarity of seeing? The eye cannot get it. The eye can only establish precepts, symbols, and try to follow them, and transgress and topple and stumble all the time, or be so strict in following them that one becomes a menace to oneself and others. Because when I do right, I want you to do right, by gum. We've been through this historically, through horrible, horrible times, and it's still going on. Enforcing precepts upon ourselves and each other. I wonder whether in seeing what is not awareness, what is not right action, and it's not that, it's not that, it's not that and also not that, then what's left? If the thought comes up, how depressing, there's nothing to hold on to, that's not it either. Somebody said this morning, there was a moment when there was no burden. The burden that one has carried all one's life, it wasn't there. Which means no fear, no wanting, no guilt. No effort or will to get rid of the burden. And that was an aspect of this insight. One cannot get rid of these things. One cannot try to get rid of the burden. That's more of it. That's the burden. And even though what is said is very often misunderstood, because the way the mind is trained to think and listen, it is never said get rid of fear or anger. What we say is, let's look at it, and let's look at it together and alone. The whole thing. The thought that comes up and the feeling that follows. The emotions and the thoughts that come from the emotions, and not think of I must get rid of it. If that thought comes up, let's see it as for what it is, so that the whole scene becomes lit up with seeing what is going on, not trying to alter it or change it. We've tried that for thousands of years. And since there are these moments of coming to, in the midst of pain or anger or thoughts, fear, something can be seen about what's going on, and a memory may still be there of this led to that. So there's learning as we go. In darkness a lot of time, maybe most of the time, and then some light, a moment of coming to and seeing what's going on and wondering about it. So many people say, why do we do and stick to and cling to what gives us such tremendous pain and misery and difficulty? Well, is it really a live question, or just sort of an exclamation of exasperation? As that it may provide some release momentarily, but it doesn't bring this gnawingness of a question that one can't put away. Why does one keep doing, or keep thinking, or keep clinging to what so obvious leads to isolation and conflict, separation from each other, and all the mess we're in? Not to ask for explanations, but to let the question operate so that there will be glimpses as these things do happen. The pleasure that is there in an angry release, the power felt in expressing anger. These are just things one may discover, but one may never realize. Because the question is asked and allow it to sit there, not try to find a solution to it and put it away. A mental solution, an explanation, or what a famous psychologist or analyst or philosopher has said. Our usual idea about learning is to read and study or recall one's experiences and store it in memory for reference, for future and present reference. But there's a different way of using this word learning, which is seeing as you go, inquiring and investigating as you go. Or not seeing, being confused and being in touch with that confusion as we go. One person talked about such vagueness or fogginess, in touch with the vagueness and fogginess as we go. And the question there all the time, what is it? But not the usual brain response, it's this and this and this because of that and that and that. But keep watching, keep learning, not storing it up. Which becomes a relief from the burden of the collected story of our life. Is that possible? Learn, look, question. Not know, not find out as we go. Open. And when it feels like ever so closed and dense, can one be in touch with that too? Not try to open it up or be rid of it. But what is it? Not zeroing in on the particular, but also there with the bird and the cool air. We will end here for today.